What screams I am not the badass I pretend to be. You don't want to see me mad. Unless your name is Bruce Banner, STFU. TBF, you don't want to see me mad because there's a decent chance I'll just start ugly crying and it'll get really awkward for everyone. Fuck, I hate that I'm a frustrated crier. People are always like, oh shit, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry, and I'm sitting there like, no motherfucker, I am pissed, I wanna fight. I don't want to see anyone mad. It just makes me really uncomfortable. Demanding respect, but giving none to anyone. Or doing nothing to earn any respect, yet demand it. Related to that. Some URL. Sometimes people use respect to mean treating someone like a person, and sometimes they use respect to mean treating someone like an authority. And sometimes people who are used to being treated like an authority say, if you won't respect me, I won't respect you, and they mean if you won't treat me like an authority, I won't treat you like a person. And they think they're being fair, but they aren't, and it's not okay. Claiming to be crazy like it's something to aspire to. In this context, it just means abandoning tact and acting like an asshole to feel like a badass. ETA, I'm not referring to people with legitimate illnesses. I'm referring to people who think acting like an asshole makes them look tough. I'm actually friends with a guy who I would call legitimately crazy. I've known him since high school, and I remember once seeing him narrowly miss stabbing a pen through somebody's hand and drive it through the cover of a binder and halfway through the papers inside it. I outweigh this guy by like 100 pounds and have almost a foot in height over him, and the thought of getting into a fight with him scares the piss out of me because I'm sure that win or lose I will walk away missing an ear or an eye or something. I'm losing a piece somewhere. Outside of it, he's a really nice guy who's never started a fight and never once described himself as crazy, and actually seems a little embarrassed about it when it's brought up. We all just fucking know it. I've heard people call themselves crazy and I just think about my one lunatic friend and scoff. I would have enlisted and probably made special forces, but I would have punched a drill sergeant if they had gotten in my face. Sure, bud. Yeah, cause they always trust the guy who can't control himself or follow orders to the highest ranks of the military, and they give them the biggest guns too. Worked with a guy like that, I'd brush him off most times. But if anyone ever tried to call him on his bullshit, he was quick to threaten to call the cops. Lamau, what would the cops even do? Officer, I do not like how this man is speaking to me. Uploading video of yourself saying how badass you are. Project Badass was pretty badass though. The pyrotechnics are what makes this. That was pretty badass. You know what's badass? Being alive. Do you know who I am? Or whose son/daughter I am kind of people? Do you know who I am? Please tell me, because I do not. I feel very lost in life. I thought about going into flight attending years ago. I read a book written by a flight attendant, and her crew had come up with a response to the "Do you know who I am?" crowd. They'd immediately ask, "Oh dear, do you not know who you are? Does anyone recognize this person? They don't know who they are." Don't worry ma'am/sir, we're calling 911 for you. Had a guy from a very wealthy family brought into the cells for DV offenses. DV guy, do you know who I am? Cell sergeant arrested. DV guy didn't really have a comeback for that one, saying I'm a psychopath. On the same note, having a profile picture of the Joker. Following those Joker quotes pages that nave nothing ever said by any version of the Joker ever. They usually just copy and paste the dumbest quotes they could find on Tumblr with a pic of the Joker. The worst part is the amount of stupid people in the comments that say OMG that's so me, I'm so unique. I'm glad I no longer deal with people like this. I used to, and they are exhausting. Aggressive responses to non-aggressive situations. Nobody who's really about that life wants to do things to people. The difference between a badass and a bully. Last night at work I asked a kid who looked to be about 16 or 17 to move 3 feet to the left. We needed a walkway cleared for emergencies and he was in the way. The kid got up and growled at me, then had his chest puffed up for the rest of the night. I've gotten some annoyed responses from customers before, because it actually is annoying but we have to do it, but I've never had someone start pretending to be a wolf or some shit to scare me off. telling people how badass you are. God, I'm a bastard. Some URL. Could literally hear Roy's voice when reading that. I knew what it was before I clicked on it. So you keep saying. The biggest indicator that you are not a badass is telling me you are a badass. If you have to tell me how important you are not terribly important. Game of Thrones. Joffrey, I am the king. Tywin Lannister, any king who says I am the king is no true king. That quote is based on the real-life quote from Margaret Thatcher. Being powerful is like being a lady, if you have to tell people you are, you aren't. Continually requesting a fight, but never actually starting the fight. I've seen lots of these, two men, usually having been drinking, standing about 30 feet from each other gesturing to each other with arms out saying, "Come on. Come on. I'll fuck you up," etc. for 5 minutes. It's like you're both not fooling anyone, just give it up and go get another beer. There's a South Park episode that nails this. We don't take too kindly to people who don't take too kindly to others. Now Skeeter he ain't hurtin' nobody. Anyone who gives themselves a tough-sounding nickname. They are to be earned, not self-imposed. I met this one guy amongst a group of mutual friends. Everyone called him Beef. I was expecting a super huge douchebag. But he introduced himself as his actual name, and when I asked him about the nickname he just kind of shrugged. Super cool guy, and introduced me to his sister. Nicknames are a funny thing. I went to high school with a guy named Beef. We called him that because his last name was LaBeouf and it sounds similar. He was a small guy and really friendly. Edit, alright, I get it. It literally means beef in French. Was he an actual cannibal? Spousal and child abuse. I just watched a video of the police interrogating a guy who killed his ex-wife. For 4 hours he just kept going on and on about how much of a fighter he is, his Irish pride, born and raised in New York, how he would kill the woman from child support collection, and that watching Criminal Minds taught him everything about how the police worked. I don't think I ever listened to a more obvious loser. Someone's been watching JCS LOL. That's exactly who I thought of when I read this title LOL. Same picture of a lion that 20,000 others already posted to prove how they're not sheep that fall in line. A real badass posts photos of elephants with himself photoshopped into them like Vin Diesel. I've lately seen bumper stickers that say "Raise lions not sheep," and I cringe every time. Do you know those people who disrespect teachers, janitors, and other people who work just to make them able to not being fucked in the ass by life? That screams it out loud. You're not badass, you're disrespectful and ignorant. I went to lunch with a friend and a friend of his. The waiter was a little slow in bringing us our drinks and food because it was busy. So when our bills came, instead of leaving an actual tip, the other guy wrote something snarky as his tip. I was really embarrassed and asked if he can refrain from doing that. He refused and then basically called me a wuss. I left a bigger tip on my bill to compensate and never wanted to be associated with that guy ever again. You're a real badass now, buddy, punching down on a retail worker who has to be at least polite to you to keep their job. Also those shit heels that make a mess on purpose for wait/janitorial staff, and then say hey, it's job security. No, you pickled anus, we don't need your job security, we have plenty to do every day. You're just a self-centered shit wrinkle that doesn't have enough human DNA left to generate the smallest fraction of empathy. Pickled anus that just tickles me. Any reference to oneself as alpha. The saddest alpha thing I've ever witnessed was a guy at work, who asked me, as custodian of the office's tape printing machine, to print the word alpha for him, so he could stick it onto his car's steering wheel, and remind himself of his alpha status whenever he was driving along. And #X200B. Alpha, in Arial bold, with black text, on 24mm yellow tape. To be stuck on the steering wheel of his small 3-door car. M, single, late 30s, bald, overweight, still living with his mom. Alpha. He even let out a little GRR to emphasize what he wanted to think when he looked down at his steering wheel and saw his special sticker. Alpha. That is the most desperate, embarrassing, and pathetic thing I think I've ever read in my life. So Alpha, in fact, that his mom probably still washed his skid-marked and spunk-stained underwear. I'm prior enlisted in the Marines and I'm happy I was in, but now that I'm out that time has passed. I can't stand people that were in it. It's their entire identity after they get out. All clothes are military stuff, vehicles covered in military decals, all they talk about is when they were in and so on. For anyone that wasn't in, the easiest way to tell someone that was in the military but weren't in any kind of real combat situations is if they wear and do all that crap. Edit spelling. I knew a guy who didn't even make it to boot camp that did all that shit. He broke his leg or something like a week before shipping off to boot camp, and I think they ended up just dismissing him completely or something to that effect. Didn't matter though, his whole personality revolved around being a Marine. You know my brother-in-law?